I sat in the kitchen, staring at the half-empty coffee mug in front of me. The warm steam rose into the cool air, but I couldn't bring myself to take a sip. The silence in the room was almost too loud. For the past few months, I'd been feeling this nagging emptiness inside me, something that just wouldn't go away. My husband, James, was a good man. He was kind, dependable, and loving. He worked hard, always there when I needed him. But I had begun to feel like we were living separate lives in the same house. We were drifting apart, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I ran my fingers over the rim of the cup, deep in thought. James didn't deserve me. He deserved someone who could appreciate him fully, someone who didn't feel the way I did. The passion that once existed between us had slowly faded. We had grown comfortable, but that was all. I felt stuck, trapped in a life that seemed to have lost its spark. Then there was Lucas. I had met him a few months ago at a business event. He was everything James wasn't: rich, charming, and full of energy. Lucas made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. He was always talking about his latest achievements, his growing empire, and how he could offer me a life filled with luxury and excitement. I liked how he looked at me, as though I was the most important person in the room. With James, I had become just another part of his routine, a task to check off every day. When Lucas invited me on a weekend getaway to a private island, I couldn't resist. I told myself it was just a break from the everyday grind. But the moment I stepped onto that island, I felt something inside me stir. Lucas was the kind of man who could make all my dreams come true. Fancy dinners, designer clothes, and trips to places I had only seen in magazines. He had everything I thought I wanted. But as much as I enjoyed the luxury and excitement, there was a part of me that felt guilty. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I had left James for a man who could give me a life of indulgence. But was it enough? Lucas never talked about anything deeper than material things. His world seemed so different from the quiet, simple life I had shared with James. I missed the conversations, the comfort of knowing someone truly cared for me. When I returned home from the island, the guilt started to eat at me. James had no idea where I had been. He had tried to call me several times, but I ignored his messages. I knew I was hurting him, but I couldn't stop myself. Something inside me had changed, and I was scared to face it. That night, James sat down across from me at the dinner table. I could see the worry in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. We ate in silence, the awkwardness thick between us. Finally, after we finished, he spoke up, his voice soft. "You've been distant lately," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. How could I tell him that I was no longer happy, that I was thinking about leaving him for another man? How could I admit that I had fallen for someone who seemed to offer everything I thought I needed? "I'm just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long week. Maybe we just need to take a break." James nodded, his face falling slightly. "I understand," he said quietly. "But if you ever need to talk, I'm here." His words felt like a punch to the stomach. How had I gotten to this point? How had I let myself fall into this situation? But deep down, I knew the answer. I had been running away from the quiet life I had built with James, thinking there was something better out there. Now, I was faced with the reality of my choices, and the guilt was overwhelming. I stood up from the table, my heart heavy. "I think I need some time to think," I said, walking out of the room. As I closed the door behind me, I couldn't help but wonder if I had already made the decision to leave. But in my heart, I wasn't sure if I could go through with it. The days after that night seemed to blur together. I spent more time with Lucas, and slowly my life began to feel like a whirlwind. Everything I had ever dreamed of was coming true. I woke up every morning to beautiful views, fresh coffee, and texts from Lucas asking what adventure we would go on next. It was like living in a dream where money wasn't an issue, and every moment felt exciting. The trips to exotic places became routine. There was always a new restaurant to try, a new luxury hotel to stay in, or a new party to attend. Lucas knew everyone. Rich businessmen, celebrities, and socialites. He moved in circles I had only seen on TV. I had never imagined that this kind of life could be mine. But now, it was all so easy. All I had to do was smile and enjoy the ride. But as the weeks passed, something started to feel off. At first, it was small things. I noticed how Lucas seemed more interested in showing off his wealth than in getting to know the real me. Every time we went out, he was always talking about his latest business deals, the newest car he had bought, or how many zeros were on his latest paycheck. It was like there was nothing else to talk about. Everything was about what he owned, what he could buy, and who he knew. I couldn't deny the appeal of the lifestyle. The private jets, the designer clothes, and the way people looked at me when I was with him. It all felt thrilling at first. It was a world I had never known, and part of me was fascinated by it. But after a while, I began to feel like a trophy. I was just another accessory on Lucas's arm, another thing for him to show off to his friends. When we were alone, it was different. He would sometimes ask about my day or listen to my thoughts, but it never felt like he really cared. It was more like he was checking off a list, making sure everything was perfect in his world. I missed the quiet moments I had shared with James, the way we could sit together and talk about anything and everything, even in silence. James had never been the type to talk about money or status. He was comfortable in his own skin, and he made me feel the same way. With Lucas, it was all about appearances. Everything had to be perfect, and if it wasn't, we moved on to something new. There was no time to stop and appreciate the small things, the things that really mattered. One afternoon, after a fancy lunch at a 5-star restaurant, Lucas suggested we go shopping for a new wardrobe. I agreed, thinking it would be fun, but the experience left me feeling empty. We walked through the aisles of expensive stores, trying on dresses and shoes that cost more than my entire monthly salary. But the more I tried on, the more uncomfortable I felt. Nothing felt real. I wasn't buying these clothes for myself. I was buying them to keep up with Lucas's world. As we were leaving the store, Lucas mentioned he had just bought a new yacht. He was already planning the next trip and casually asked if I'd be interested in joining. At that moment, something inside me clicked. I stopped walking and looked around. The world we were living in felt like an illusion, a world built on material things that didn't really matter. I realized that none of this had made me happy. The luxury, the clothes, the parties, it was all just a distraction from the emptiness inside me. Later that night, Lucas and I were lounging by the pool at his mansion. The warm water and bright lights made everything feel even more surreal. He was talking about his upcoming business trip to Europe, but I wasn't really listening. Instead, my mind kept drifting back to James. I wondered what he was doing, if he missed me, or if he was even thinking about me at all. Had he moved on? Was he happy, or was he sitting alone in our old house, waiting for me to come back? I didn't want to admit it, but I missed him. I missed the simplicity of our life, the quiet moments where we didn't need anything more than each other. I had left him for a man who could give me everything I thought I wanted, but now I wasn't sure if any of it was worth it. The luxury, the attention, the excitement, it all felt empty. I didn't know what to do, but I knew something had to change. The life I was living wasn't real, and it was only a matter of time before the illusion would shatter. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw him again. I wasn't expecting to run into anyone I knew, especially not someone from my past. I had spent the day shopping with Lucas, picking out new outfits that felt more like costumes than clothes. I had been distracted, my thoughts still lingering on the idea of James. Was he still the same man I had left behind? Or had he changed in ways I couldn't even imagine? I was lost in thought as we strolled through the mall when suddenly I spotted a familiar face across the store. My heart skipped a beat. It was Jonathan, James's best friend. At first, I didn't know whether to approach him. It had been months since I had seen anyone from my old life. I wasn't sure what to expect, or how he would react to seeing me with Lucas. But before I could turn away, Jonathan noticed me. His eyes widened in surprise, and then his face softened into something that looked like sympathy. I froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. But then he made his way over to me. "Well, well," he said, a half smile on his face. "Look who's living the high life." There was no anger in his voice, but there was a quiet sadness. It was like he knew what had happened before I even said a word. Lucas stepped closer to me, his hand resting on my back. Jonathan glanced at him, and then back at me. "So, this is your new life?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound confident. "This is Lucas." I gestured toward him, but I couldn't help the awkwardness that hung in the air. Jonathan nodded slowly, his gaze shifting between the two of us. "I see." His voice was calm, but I could tell there was something deeper in his words. "Look, I didn't come here to judge you or anything," he continued, his tone softening. "But I want you to know something. James isn't doing well, you know." The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I had been so focused on my new life, so caught up in the excitement and luxury, that I hadn't even thought about James. I hadn't checked in on him, hadn't thought about how he was coping with everything. The guilt came rushing back, sharper than before. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's been lost ever since you left," Jonathan said. "He hasn't really been himself. He's been working more, burying himself in his job, but I can see it. It's like he's missing a part of him, and I think you know what that part is." I didn't know how to respond. Jonathan's words hit too close to home, and I felt a lump form in my throat. The man I had once known, the man who had been my partner, my friend, was hurting, and I hadn't even cared enough to check in on him. I had been so selfish, so wrapped up in my own desires and the thrill of something new, that I hadn't stopped to think about the person I had left behind. Lucas, sensing the tension, gave me a small, confused glance, but I couldn't bring myself to introduce this part of my past to him. It felt wrong somehow, like I was betraying him just by even acknowledging that part of me. I turned away from Jonathan for a moment, my mind spinning. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that I regretted leaving James, but the words didn't come out. What was there to say? How could I explain the mess I had made of everything? Finally, Jonathan sighed and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I don't mean to make you feel guilty, but you should know that James is really struggling. Maybe it's time to think about what you really want. Don't keep running away from it." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. He was right, in a way I didn't want to admit. I had been running, not just from James, but from myself. The life I thought I wanted with Lucas was starting to feel like a hollow dream. And now, seeing how James was suffering, I wasn't sure where I belonged anymore. "Thank you, Jonathan," I said quietly. "I'll think about what you said." He gave me one last look before walking away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing with thoughts of James. Was it too late to fix things? Had I ruined everything by leaving him for a life that wasn't real? Lucas, still standing by my side, was talking about something, but I couldn't focus on his words. My heart was heavy, and all I could think about was James and how much I had taken him for granted. I had a feeling that the decision I was avoiding was now staring me right in the face. The next few days were strange. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jonathan had said. Every time I saw Lucas, I felt this unease that I couldn't shake. I had tried to ignore it, to just enjoy the luxury and excitement of my new life, but it was getting harder. Something was missing, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. All the glitz and glamour around me couldn't fill the emptiness that had started to grow in my chest. Then, one evening, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in the living room of Lucas's mansion, flipping through a magazine, when I noticed something on the coffee table. It was a business magazine, with a bold headline that caught my eye. "Reclusive billionaire James Harrison makes groundbreaking investment." My heart stopped for a moment. James. My James. I knew his last name was Harrison, but I never imagined he could be a billionaire. I quickly picked up the magazine and began reading. The article talked about a man named James Harrison who had made a huge investment in a tech startup that was expected to change the industry. He was described as a private, mysterious figure who rarely made public appearances, but had earned respect in the business world. There were photos of him at some high-end events, standing with other well-known figures. He looked different, almost unrecognizable. But that was definitely him. My mind raced as I read more, trying to understand how this could be possible. The man I had known, the man I had married, was a billionaire. How had I not known? As I read through the article, a wave of confusion and guilt washed over me. James had always kept things simple. He never talked about money or business in the way Lucas did. I had always assumed he was just a regular guy, working a steady job and living a quiet life. But this was a completely different story. I felt like I had been living in the dark, blind to the life James had been leading behind the scenes. How could he have kept something so big from me? Or had I just not cared enough to ask? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Had he been hiding this from me all along? Was this some kind of secret life he had been leading while I was stuck in a bubble of comfort and security? I couldn't help but feel betrayed. But at the same time, I realized something important. James hadn't hidden this from me because he didn't trust me. He had hidden it because he didn't want me to love him for his money. I had left him, and he had never told me the truth about his wealth because he hadn't wanted me to stay for the wrong reasons. He had wanted me to love him for who he was, not for what he could offer me. Sitting there, holding the magazine in my hands, I couldn't help but feel a wave of regret. I had left him. I had walked away from a man who loved me, who cared for me in ways I had never fully understood. And now, here I was, in a life filled with luxury and wealth, but without the one thing that had truly mattered: love. I thought about Lucas and how he had made me feel alive. But now, it all seemed so shallow. He was a man of business, always looking for the next deal, the next opportunity to show off. With him, everything was about appearance, status, and success. With James, it had always been about the quiet moments, the love we had shared without all the distractions. I needed answers. I couldn't sit around anymore, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I had to find out more about James, about his life, and what had really been going on while I was caught up in the excitement of my new world. I quickly grabbed my phone and sent him a text, my hand shaking as I typed. "James, we need to talk. I need to understand." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The wait for his response felt like hours, but finally, my phone buzzed. His message was simple: "Let's meet." I didn't need to ask where. I already knew. The time had come. I was about to face the truth, whatever it might be. The day of the meeting arrived quickly. I spent the entire morning trying to calm my nerves, but it was no use. My thoughts kept racing back to everything that had happened. I had left James for Lucas, chasing a dream that was starting to feel more like a nightmare. Now, after everything, I had to face him. The man I had once loved, the man I had walked away from without looking back. I chose a quiet cafe for the meeting. It was familiar, a place where we had spent many afternoons talking about everything and nothing. I sat by the window, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. The cafe was peaceful, with soft music playing in the background and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. But inside me, everything felt chaotic. I didn't know what I expected when James walked in. He was wearing a simple jacket and jeans, nothing extravagant. His presence was calm, unassuming, and it made me feel like I was the one who was out of place. As soon as our eyes met, I could see the change in him. He looked different, older, more serious, but there was still a kindness in his eyes. He hadn't been angry in his messages, and I could see now that he wasn't here to yell at me or blame me. He was just there, waiting. He walked over to the table and sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken words. I had so much to say, but I didn't know where to start. Finally, James broke the silence. "So I guess you found out," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of sadness. I nodded, not sure if I could find the right words. "I had no idea," I whispered. "About everything." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want to be the reason you stayed with me because of my money. I wanted you to stay because you loved me, not because I could give you things." The guilt that had been growing inside me only grew heavier. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I never understood. I was so focused on what I thought I wanted that I didn't even stop to think about what was right in front of me." James didn't look angry. He just looked tired, as if the weight of everything had worn him down. "It's not your fault," he said quietly. "You were looking for something I couldn't give you. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't know how. I never wanted you to leave me for the wrong reasons. I thought if you knew about my wealth, it would change how you saw me." My heart ached as I listened to him. How could I have been so blind? James had always been there for me, supporting me in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. He hadn't cared about status or wealth. He had just wanted to be with me. And now, I had thrown it all away for a life that didn't even make me happy. "James," I said, my voice trembling, "I don't know what to say. I made a terrible mistake. I left you for the wrong reasons, and I don't know if I can fix it." He reached across the table and took my hand, a gentle touch that surprised me. "I don't know if we can go back," he said, "but I never stopped caring about you. I never wanted you to feel like you weren't enough. You always were. I wanted to protect you from all of this." I looked down at his hand in mine, feeling the weight of the decision I had to make. Lucas's world had been filled with excitement and luxury, but it had never been real. With James, there had been a depth that I had taken for granted. He had loved me for who I was, and yet I had pushed him away. Now, I didn't know if I could fix what I had broken. "I don't know what I'm looking for anymore," I admitted, my voice quiet. I thought it was all about the money, the thrill, the excitement. But now I see, it was never about that. It was always about us. James nodded, his eyes softening. "It's not too late to figure things out. We don't have to rush anything. I'm not asking you to come back right now. I just want you to know that I'm here, if you want to talk or if you need time." There was so much I wanted to say, but in that moment, words didn't feel like they were enough. All I could do was sit there, holding his hand, and wonder if it was too late to rebuild what we had once shared. But one thing was certain. The life I had been living with Lucas was not the life I wanted anymore. I was ready to face the truth, no matter what came next. The rest of the conversation was quiet, filled with things unsaid and questions that would take time to answer. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. After that conversation with James, everything seemed to change. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but at the same time, I wasn't sure what was next. I had spent so much time chasing a life that wasn't real, a life I thought would bring me happiness, but in reality, it only left me feeling emptier. James had always been the one who made me feel truly understood. Now, as I sat there, thinking about what to do next, I realized I had to make a choice. I spent the next few days lost in thought. Lucas kept sending me texts and calling, asking where I was, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. It felt like everything with him was based on appearances, on what looked good to others. But with James, it had always been about something deeper, something that had gotten lost when I'd walked away from him. One morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. Take a walk. I needed to clear my mind and figure out what I truly wanted. The air was cool, the sky a soft blue, and the streets were quiet as I walked down the familiar path to the park. It was a place James and I used to visit often, We would sit on the same bench, watch the ducks in the pond, and talk about our hopes and dreams. It felt like a lifetime ago. When I arrived at the park, I sat on the same bench, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I thought about Lucas, his flashy lifestyle, and the emptiness I had started to feel. I thought about James and how his simple love had always felt real. I realized something important. I didn't need the luxury and the attention from others to be happy. I needed honesty, love, and a connection that went beyond what could be bought. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from James. "Can we meet again?" My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the message for a moment, taking a deep breath before replying. "Yes, I'd like that." We agreed to meet at the same cafe where we had talked before. When I arrived, James was already there, waiting for me. His eyes softened when he saw me, but there was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet understanding that things had been complicated and that we still had a long way to go. "Hey," he said, giving me a small smile. "Hey," I replied, sitting down across from him. There was a brief silence, and then I spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About everything. About us." James nodded, waiting for me to continue. "I left because I thought I needed something more," I said quietly. "I thought I needed excitement, adventure, and wealth. But what I've learned is that none of that really matters. What matters is what's real. And with you, James, that's always been real." He didn't say anything right away, but I could see the emotion in his eyes. It was the same look he had when we were together. Comfort, warmth, and love. "I never stopped caring about you," he said softly. "I just wanted you to be happy, even if that meant you had to find it somewhere else." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have never left you for the wrong reasons." James reached across the table and gently took my hand. "It's okay," he said. "I don't want you to apologize. We both made mistakes, but we can start over. We can figure things out together." There was something about the way he spoke that made me believe in the possibility of starting fresh. I didn't need all the answers right now, but I knew one thing for sure. I wanted to try again. I didn't want the flashy lifestyle that had promised everything but delivered nothing. I wanted the quiet moments, the simple joys that came from being with someone who truly cared. "So, what now?" I asked, looking at him with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Now we take it one step at a time," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We rebuild what we had. Slowly. No rush. Just us." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. With James, I knew I could start over and build something real, something that wasn't based on wealth or appearances, but on love, trust, and understanding. We sat there for a while, talking and laughing like we used to. It felt like the beginning of something new, something beautiful. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. Things began to settle down after that day with James. It wasn't an easy process. Rebuilding something that had been broken always takes time. But with every conversation, every moment spent together, I felt like we were getting closer to the truth we had always shared: love, honesty, and the simple things that mattered most. James was patient, never rushing me, but always showing me that he still cared in the quietest ways. Little gestures, like holding my hand or the way he would listen to everything I said, reminded me of why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. We started seeing each other more often, not in flashy places or expensive restaurants, but in the small, familiar spots that had always been ours. We visited the park again, walked around the city, and spent afternoons just talking. There was no pressure, no expectations. It felt like a new beginning. I had to let go of all the ideas I had about what life should look like and instead focus on what felt right. And with James, everything felt right. One afternoon, James invited me to meet him at his apartment. It wasn't like the mansions I had become used to. It was simple, modern furniture, a few personal touches, and the quiet, comfortable feel of a home that had been lived in. It felt real. I could tell he had put thought into making it a place where he could just be himself, not someone trying to impress others. "Come in," he said with a warm smile. I made lunch. "You cooked?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. I had always known James to be a practical man, but cooking wasn't something he often did when we were together. "Yeah, I thought I'd try something new," he said with a laugh, a twinkle in his eye. "It's simple, but I hope it's good." I walked into the small kitchen area, where a plate of pasta sat on the counter, along with a bottle of wine. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, making my stomach rumble. "This looks great," I said, taking a seat at the small dining table. "You've really outdone yourself." He smiled and sat down across from me, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "It's not much, but it's what I can offer. Sometimes it's the small things that matter most." As we ate, we talked about everything: our past, our mistakes, and how we had both grown. James was no longer the man I had left behind. He was stronger, more confident in himself, and ready to move forward. I could see the change in him, and it made me realize just how much I had changed too. I wasn't the same person who had walked away from him for a life that wasn't real. I was learning to appreciate what truly mattered. "I've been thinking," James said, setting his fork down, "about us, about the future." I looked up, my heart beating a little faster. "What do you mean?" He smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "I know it's been a long road, and we've both made mistakes, but I want to see where we can go from here. I want to build something real with you, something that lasts." His words touched me deeply. I had spent so much time worrying about the future, trying to find answers in the wrong places, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I truly wanted. And now, sitting across from James, I realized that what I wanted was simple: honesty, love, and a chance to build a life that wasn't about appearances, but about what we shared. "I want that too," I said, my voice soft but filled with conviction. "I want to build something with you, something real. I don't need the flashy lifestyle or the attention. I just need us." James reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Then let's start. One step at a time." It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. I didn't have all the answers, and the future was still uncertain. But I knew that with James by my side, I was on the right path. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready to face whatever came next, as long as we did it together. The rest of the afternoon passed in comfortable silence, and as we finished our meal, I realized something important. The life I had been chasing had never been the right one for me. It wasn't about the things I could buy or the status I could achieve. It was about the connections I made, the people I loved, and the simple moments that made life worth living. And with James, I knew that everything we had been through had brought us to this moment. We weren't perfect, but together, we could build a future that was real, grounded in love and understanding. It was a new beginning, and it was exactly what we both needed. Time passed, and with each day, I felt more certain about the path I had chosen. Things with James weren't always perfect. There were still moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I was making the right choice. But as we continued to spend time together, talking about our hopes and dreams, I realized how strong the bond between us was. It was something I had never truly understood until now. We took our time rebuilding what we once had. It wasn't rushed or forced. It just happened naturally. We didn't need grand gestures or extravagant gifts to show how much we cared for each other. Instead, it was in the small moments, the quiet mornings spent over coffee, the late-night talks when we were both too tired to say much, but still wanted to be near each other. That was when I understood. Love wasn't about the grand gestures or the lavish lifestyle. It was about being there for each other, supporting each other, and growing together. One evening, James took me to the park again, the same place where we had spent so many afternoons together before everything changed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and there was a cool breeze in the air. We sat on the bench, just like we used to, watching the world go by. "Remember when we used to sit here and talk about everything?" James asked, his voice soft. I smiled, leaning back against the bench. "Yeah, I remember. We had so many plans. We thought we knew exactly what we wanted." He laughed, a quiet, knowing sound. "We did. But sometimes life has a way of showing us that the plans we make aren't always the right ones." I never realized how much I took for granted, I admitted, looking at him. "I always thought I wanted more excitement, more adventure. But what I really needed was you, and what we have together. It's simple, but it's enough." James reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I feel the same way. I don't need anything else as long as I have you." It was in that moment that I knew everything had changed. Not just for me, but for both of us. We had both learned what was truly important, and we had found each other again in the process. We didn't need the fancy things or the public recognition. All we needed was each other. We spent the rest of the evening talking about the future. We talked about the kind of life we wanted to build together. We didn't know exactly where we were going, but we were okay with that. We had learned that life wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about the journey and being together through it all. Over the next few months, we continued to strengthen our relationship. We moved into a small apartment together, one that was simple but felt like home. We didn't need a mansion or expensive cars. What we had now was enough. We worked on building our future, step by step. We supported each other in ways we never had before, and it felt like we were truly a team. There were still challenges, of course. Life always has its ups and downs, but we faced them together. I kept in touch with Lucas, but the more time passed, the more I realized how much he and his world no longer fit into my life. The excitement and glamour that once seemed so important faded away, and what mattered most was the love and peace I found with James. We had both moved on, and the decision I had made to be with him felt more right every day. A year later, we found ourselves sitting in the same park again. The sun was setting, just like before, and everything felt as if it had come full circle. James turned to me, his eyes soft and filled with love. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady, "about the future, about us." I looked at him, my heart racing. "What about it?" He smiled, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "I think it's time to take the next step. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." I felt my heart leap in my chest. I knew what he was asking before he even said the words. "James, are you asking me to marry you?" He nodded, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes as I looked at the ring, and then at him. I had never been more sure of anything in my life. "Yes," I whispered, my voice filled with emotion. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring on my finger, and we embraced, holding each other tightly as the sun dipped below the horizon. In that moment, I realized just how far we had come. We had started off on different paths, made mistakes, and lost our way. But in the end, we had found each other again. And now we were building the future we had always dreamed of, together. Our journey wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough.